Episode 1 of the Iron and Anchor podcast. I'm Paul Callahan here with Jake Morter. We are coming at you. This is our, not the teaser episode. This is the first for-real episode. This is a get to know you episode with Jake and I. You're going to know, we're going to kind of give you, I think if I had to, tell my whole story, we'd be here for probably 2 or 3 episodes. But what we're going to do is give you a little get to know us and, go into a little bit more detail of why stories are important to us. So, yeah, join us, episode 1.
Come on.
This is Paul talking, and so I wanted to do this podcast. I kind of gave you a little, teaser in the little intro episode of why. One of the main reasons is because I have a story that sometimes brings shame, sometimes brings guilt, still to this day, and also when my grandfather was passing away of cancer, he worked at GM all his life, and when he retired, him and my grandmother just traveled all over the country in their travel van that they named Dino, and they met so many people. My grandfather never met a car with its hood up that it didn't like. He was always helping to fix things. And so he basically, they gave him 2 weeks to live. He lived for 4, and I spent, that whole time up in North Carolina with them. And so many people from all over the country were coming to see him, and they were telling me these stories of my grandfather that I just didn't know. And it just opened up who my grandfather was to me and the kind of man that he was. And I was just very impressed with that. So that has stuck around to me in what stories and the power of stories can do. So I'm just going to start off with a little bit about myself. I'm on the other side of 40. I'm a Georgia boy living in the Midwest. I've only been living in Dayton, Ohio for the last a little over 9 years, because I just had my wedding anniversary, been married just like 2 weeks over 9 years. Now, my beautiful wife, Lisa, we have one daughter, Gianna, she's 3.5. We live in East Dayton in Linden Heights, and it's a wonderful house. I live, close to friends and have a great community. So the way I got here is kind of a roundabout way. Jake, how long have you lived in Dayton all your life?
Well, I live in Kettering.
Represent 937?
Yeah, 937, come on. I live in Kettering, which is a suburb of Dayton. I've lived here all my life, born and raised since forever.
Siblings, anything like that?
Siblings?
Yeah, do you have
Yeah, I have 2 older brothers.
Which I'd like to give a shout out to Justin Morter and Justin Morter Designs. If you go to our website, ironandanchor.com, and you see all of our graphics, all our videos, that is thanks to Justin sitting behind the camera tonight. We thank you for that. So you have 2 older brothers, born and raised in Kettering. Don't you live like just a few blocks from where you grew up?
Justin actually lives right around the corner. Yeah. You could definitely walk there.
But you live in the same neighborhood as your mom too, don't you?
Correct. We don't like to go far from the nest. My mom lives on one street, then Justin bought a house about 4 blocks over. Yeah. And then when Jesse and I got married, we were thinking, well, we'd like to be close to Justin and Andrea and mom. So we bought a house in the same neighborhood.
Nice. Yeah, I used to live in Kettering, and then I moved to the great neighborhood of Linden Heights. Decided to get a little bit more ghetto down in East Dayton. It's actually a great neighborhood. I live on an original cobblestone street, so it's very idyllic sometimes.
Absolutely. So we bought a house in the same neighborhood, thinking, we'd like to be close to grandma and our brother, and we can walk there in the summer, and it's convenient for sure. But we don't live too far from Paul and Lisa and Gianna. It's also convenient to be able to, ride on over and hang out during the summer and stuff.
Yeah, we have a very tight-knit community, and we do life together well, which is pretty awesome, something that I didn't have before I joined the FCF community. So getting back to me a little bit, my story, born and raised in Georgia, in Flowery Branch, Georgia. So I am a Falcons fan. because that's where the Falcons headquarters and training camp is. So shout out to the Atlanta Falcons for me. And I traveled a little bit as I got out of school and things like that. But I was involved in church from a young age, in youth groups and things like that. But, it was kind of more of a surfacey thing. I would go to these youth retreats and things like that and be involved. And then I dated a girl, my first girlfriend, and we were in youth together. And that didn't end well for me, but it is what it is. And then my story really gets its start at about 16, where I went to an event with our church, and I basically, it was this thing called, I think it was called Judgment House, and where you go through and, it was very interesting. It's still a very popular thing to do in churches, but basically they have these different rooms set up in these different scenes where, it might be the rapture and it might be, a car accident gone wrong and everything like that. But the main theme is like, what's going to happen to you when you die?
Oh, and kind of to scare you a little bit.
Absolutely. They had the one room that was, they had the heat jacked up, and it was like 100 degrees, and chains rattling and screaming and everything like that. So I'm guessing that was supposed to be hell. But so at the end of that, you go into a room and, there's cards on a table and somebody's talking to you. And you're like, do you want to go to hell? Well, I didn't want to go to hell. So I signed my name down on a card.
Did anybody say yes?
I don't think so. I'm pretty sure that they have a monopoly on I don't want to go to hell after that experience. I'm not discounting it. There's probably a place for it somewhere, but looking back on it now, what didn't happen was follow-up discipleship for me. So I signed my name on a card and said I didn't want to go to hell, and then just continued a very surface level relationship with God, kind of. So I was in youth groups and things like that. Graduated high school, didn't meet another girl, but I was with another girl that I known from this church previously, and she was kind of the end all be all at that time of my life, early 20s.
First love, right?
Yeah, you could probably say that.
First Christian girl love.
Yes, quote unquote.
Loosely
love. Yeah, but. That started out late teens, early 20s, started out kind of my, for lack of a better word, downfall. So early in my 20s, I experienced a ton of kidney stones. I was just having kidney stones left and right. And back then, so I said I was on the north side of, not the north side, I was on the other side of 40. Back then, 20-something years ago, we didn't have, we live in Dayton, Ohio, where the opioid crisis is, this was the hub of the opioid crisis. But back then, it really wasn't an issue. So, of course, doctors, you have kidney stone. It's a very painful thing. Prescribed me, prescription painkillers. And it quickly became a thing to where I didn't have any more kidney stones, but man, I sure like those pills. And that started a 12-year journey for me of addiction and alcoholism, because when I couldn't get the pills, when doctor shopping didn't work any longer, when none of that stuff, worked for me, I could get alcohol. So, I drank and I became an alcoholic. But even through that, I still had a surface relationship with the church, with serving, with, all my friends were worship pastors. All my friends were, doing these camps and things like that. And I was tagging along with them, but carrying this baggage with me. And I carried that for a long time. And I'd had periods of, good and bad and whatnot, but the baggage I was carrying, for a very long time. We'll get back to that in a little bit more, but I want to know about your early childhood and relationship with God, if you had one or not. I hear that you were the consummate rock star of the 937 and the skate scene.
Loosely.
And maybe a graffiti artist at one point.
Whoa.
Or something like that.
I don't know. Allegedly.
I met you as a tattooer.
Correct.
So, I mean, you've come a long way. We now work for a large international corporation, but I met you as a tattooer. So
Right.
you have you've come like a very interesting story. So, I mean, tell us a little bit.
I like to dabble in it all, we would say.
It makes you a well-rounded person.
Right. So growing up, I grew up in Kettering. Not really, let's just say there wasn't any Jesus in the home, really. My dad grew up Catholic, loosely. My grandparents on my dad's side were Catholic. But we didn't go to mass or anything with them.
Right.
Sometimes if I could stay at my cousin's house, then, potentially I would go because I was there.
Mm-hmm.
But there wasn't any Jesus in the home. So growing up, I would say not a whole lot. I know when I hit about, I'd say 12 years old, maybe, I had some buddies that I played music with. We played music together, and their family went to church.
Okay.
So when I would stay the night over there, they'd be like, well, if you're staying the night, then
You going to church?
you're coming to church.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I really wanted to go play music, so then I'm going to go to church.
Yeah.
So we'd wake up and go to church. It was a Church of Christ, right down the street, and it was different than anything I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty wild. We'll just put it at that. So I did that for a while, and that was only when I stayed the night over there.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't like every
All the time
Sunday,
thing.
I'd go to Sunday school and they'd hand out handouts, and I wasn't really paying attention. I didn't really care. It was more or less just so I could go hang out.
So just being with your friends and by that relationship, that's how you were getting to that. It wasn't, the byproduct wasn't you getting closer to God. It was just,
Exactly.
you were still just hanging with your dudes and playing music.
For sure. So I did that for a while, and nothing really came of it. Now that I look back on it, maybe God was working on me, working on my heart to bring me closer to him, but I ignored it. After that, I was like, whatever. So some time goes by. I start high school, and you know how high school is.
I do.
You're
It
worried.
was a horrible experience.
You're worried about being cool. So
Yes. I played trumpet in high school. So
did I. Well, I did middle school.
Well, so the weird thing about my high school is our football team wasn't that great, and we really didn't have much going for us but the band. And the cooler kids were kind of in the band, so
they weren't the band nerds.
it's not. Well, we were,
but you were cool.
I like to think so,
Right.
But maybe I'm not looking at it with the right glasses. Maybe they might be hair rose tinted. I don't know.
It's all right. Well, to segue off of that, I was in band in middle school. I played trumpet also.
Mm-hmm.
And then the teacher talked me into playing something else. Well, during that time, I had a buddy that I met who played drums, and he's like, yeah, you should come over and jam. So I would always pick up his guitar, and I learned what guitar was, and I was like, I'm not going to be in band anymore. Like, this is not cool. It is way cooler to play rock guitar.
What was the first song you played on guitar?
Smoke on the Water.
Seriously?
Deep Purple. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is it just because it's like 3 chords and it's just like that?
Yeah. Well, I started on bass guitar,
Oh.
so that was easier. You
Okay.
know, I took lessons, blah, blah, blah. And then I picked up the electric, and Duncan actually was skateboarding by one day, and he's like, hey, man, you want to learn how to play Crazy Train? So,
Are you serious?
I swear, that's how I met Duncan.
Where were you in that? So Duncan is one of our friends, and we work with him as well.
Mm-hmm.
But Duncan lives close to me and grew up close to where I live now. Where did you meet him? Like in Kettering or like by the skate park?
Well, no, but I had a friend that lived up a street, and she had a crush on Duncan. And it just so happened that one day we were hanging out, and my buddy Sean that lived next door, the drummer, he lived next door to Alicia, and I don't know if I should name drop or not. Sorry. But Duncan, she had a crush on him. So he came skateboarding by to hang out, and he had long hair, and he came up, and he's like, oh, you're playing guitar. So he picked up the guitar that was there, and he started teaching me a song. And then never did I know or realize that many, many, many years later, I'd be going to church with them.
And you'd be married to his wife's sister.
Exactly.
Wow, that's a crazy story.
Isn't that crazy how that works?
Wow.
So we did that. I played music, went through high school playing guitar, met some older guys through playing music who I really looked up to and thought that they were rock stars.
Yeah.
And so I, got better at guitar. They finally asked me to be in their band, which was incredible to me. It was my dream to finally be in their band. So we did that, started getting popular, playing local shows. What
was the band's
fans.
name?
That time it was called Maryland Avenue. Yeah, it was a street, which hilariously, we now work with two of the guys' moms at April Island. Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah. And again, sorry if I shouldn't name drop.
They're probably not going to listen anyway.
No, but she now works on one of the same teams, that we work with. And I was at their house having band practice in their basement as she was upstairs cooking dinner, and now I work with her. It's crazy how the world works.
So how important was music to you during that time?
It was very important.
It was the 100% driving factor in your life.
Absolutely. My dream was legitimately to be a touring rock star, and we all know how difficult that can be.
How many people actually achieve that dream?
Exactly.
I didn't really have that dream. I dreamed. When I graduated high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do after high school. So I went to our local community college and then technical college and then no college, and, just kind of fiddled around a little bit with odd jobs. And finally I was like, I like running sound. So I did that for like some random things, and then decided, hey, let me go get a degree in audio engineering. And so I went down to Florida and did that. And I'll still be paying on that till I'm 90.
I was going to say an expensive degree.
I did go get a very expensive degree, but, at the time I thought it was, the right decision to make. But even still through that, so I met this girl, and she had nothing to do with my issues. But even through that, I'm still, I'm beginning the first, years of my addiction and alcoholism, and I hit it well for people.
How old were you, if you don't mind me asking?
I was so things remembering back is a little hard sometimes, but I believe I was 21, 22 when I first really started, being like, man, I really like these pills. I'm on these pills. It was later on until I started drinking, because at first it was like I'm just dabbling in this, and I wasn't, as quote unquote addicted as I would become later on in life. But that kept the same theme, but again, still with my surface level of relationship with church and things like that. It wasn't until I got a bit older, and I met my wife about 14 years ago. So it wasn't until, late 20s that everything was like at its peak. I was, whenever I could get drugs by doctor shopping or stealing or whatever, I would. And then when I didn't, I was drinking. And a friend of mine asked me, who's a worship pastor, he asked me, he's like, hey, you went and got this degree to run sound. I'm going up to Ohio to play in a big arena. I know you run sound in arenas. Can you come run sound for me? So I said, yep. So I got in a 15-passenger van, which I'm pretty sure you've spent a lot of time in.
Absolutely.
Being a wannabe touring musician. And I came to Ohio, did this event, and met my wife. My wife was selling T-shirts, and she knew the band because...
The merch girl is what we called them.
She was.
Justin was a merch girl or merch guy, but he sold our merch.
Nice. Did he design the logos and stuff?
Yeah, he designed them. We printed them. He did everything, just like he is right now. So.
Jack of all trades.
Come on.
But so I met her. She had known the band from going to like camps and stuff like that, and then playing it. And that just started at that time of my life. I was, working for my dad's business, and I could do whatever I wanted. So about 3 weeks later, I made the 8.5-hour drive back to Ohio from Georgia, and started the dating process, with my wife, we dated 5 years, kind of off and on, before I asked her to marry me. And she had no idea about my past. She had no idea about my addiction or my alcoholism.
So at this time, it's still hidden. It's still happening.
Oh yeah, 100% hidden, 100% happening. Closer to when we got married, she became aware of, I had a drinking problem. Because that's the one thing I felt, okay, that's a little bit more acceptable, so I can let that out a little bit open, and whatnot. And, I got my act cleaned up a good bit before we got married. But we got married in 2010, and man, it was months later that it went downhill. I started working at a little kitchen here in Dayton at a restaurant, and little did I know, I had always doctor shopped, for my pills and stuff like that.
What do you mean when you say doctor shop?
Well, I would go to the doctor and say, oh, I got a kidney stone, and stuff like that, and fake that, and then they'd write you a script. And
really?
You go, yeah.
Wow.
Back then it was easy. Now it's not easy because of new laws and stuff, which absolutely is a good thing. But I became aware that, well, people just sell these things on the street, and I got hooked into that real quick, and started claiming that I didn't get paid this week, but all my money had gone to pills and things like that, and I just couldn't hide it anymore. I went to my first 30-day rehab after my wife found out, and that stuck for like 2 weeks afterwards. Still working and trying to do better, and still in church, still part of a house church community, and it just wasn't getting any better. And one day I just, it wasn't a legit attempt, but it was a cry for help. I had gotten so far low beyond anything I'd ever experienced in my life. I drove my car into a pole and wound up on like a 72-hour hold at Miami Valley. And my wife did probably the best thing she's ever done for me. Is the social worker asked, well, can he come home? Is he allowed to come home? And my wife, through some wonderful wisdom of our godly friends and people in our lives, said no. So I scrambled. I was like, well, basically the social worker is like, well, basically you're homeless now. We can release you, but you can't go home. That's on the record. You have no place to go. So I found a 6-month inpatient rehab facility here in Dayton through the Salvation Army, and went there and got my act cleaned up real good, or so I thought.
Right.
Spent 6 months there working hard, because you actually have to work there and everything like that.
They put you through the ropes, right? I mean,
they do. You go through material, this similar 12-step program. You actually have to work for the Salvation Army.
You're living there too.
You're living there.
Like
for the first 30 days, I couldn't call or see my wife or anybody and things like. And so I get out of there. I graduate. I feel good. I'm doing well. But then it was about 2 months later, I relapsed. And I had a day where things at work were going horrible. I went to the emergency room, and I did a little doctor shopping, and I relapsed. But it was really an only 1-day thing. This whole time, I thought I thought I had a relationship with God. I thought I had, what it meant to be a Christian.
You were still serving, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
right?
I was still serving in church. My wife and I were a part of a house church. We were part of a local church here, and we were, I thought that, man, if I just say I'm sorry enough, then, I'm good. I'm taken care of. But I couldn't get over, myself. I couldn't get over saying yes to drugs and alcohol. I couldn't do it. And after this relapse that lasted 1 day, God really didn't let that go. My wife got one of our house church shepherds, and he spoke some real good wisdom into my life. And then it was Easter of that year that I was standing in the pew of Apex Church, and Jason Wing, who was teaching that Sunday, he was sitting up at the front, and Phil Wing, his brother, was about 3 words into the first song, and God just broke me. I realized that me saying I'm sorry over and over and over again wasn't the point. And I finally realized that, what repentance was, and what, asking, for forgiveness, not in my own power, but God's power was. And I went up to Jason Wing, and he led me, led me in the prayer to Christ. And I got baptized that Sunday, because they were doing spontaneous baptisms on Easter Sunday. And, that was the moment for me that everything changed. The moment of realizing that, man, this is nothing that I'm ever going to do on my own, and it was all him. And it wasn't about me saying sorry. It was about me saying, forgive me, please make me new, please redeem this person that is me. So years and years, 12 years of having a surface level relationship with God and serving, but still carrying that sin, carrying that weight of my life around with me. And then on that Easter Sunday, it was gone. And that's a story that prompts me to do this podcast, is because there's a lot more to that story. There's a lot more hurt and pain, and there's a lot more joy too as well, because God has took a horrible thing and made it so good and new. But that story prompted me to want to do a podcast like this, because I was having a hard time telling it. I've told it before, but I was having a hard time really in the moments where I thought maybe somebody needed it, just opening my mouth and saying it. And I think that if we tell our stories more, if we're more free with what God has done, or more free with the struggles we're going through, there's a lot more benefit there than keeping our mouth closed. And I know my story is way different from yours, but I think there's redemption in everybody's story, at least somewhat. And for you were doing music, you were doing, being a rock star. What about that brought about a change?
Well, before we segue to me, I just want to say about yours, it kind of sounds like, you've heard the saying, for some people, you feel like your service covers up your sin or erases it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's not always the case,
Yeah.
It's wonderful that you serve, but, it took Jesus freeing you and washing your sins clean, kind of thing.
Right.
And that's what it took for me. So going into the whole quote unquote loosely rock star thing, I wasn't really a rock star. I thought I was going to be, playing music, like I said, with some guys that I had went to high school with, some older guys, the age of my older brothers. I always kind of hung out with older people.
How old were you when you started playing?
When I joined that band, I think I was 16. I was in some bands before that, so I was always the youngest guy.
Yeah.
They called me the shredder, so they always like, oh, we could really use him on lead, kind of thing. Yeah, so I didn't even drive. So I was in a band in Cedarville, which is about 40 minutes from where we live, and these guys would literally pick me up. They would drive from Cedarville to Dayton, pick me up, drive back to Cedarville to have band practice.
I mean,
and
you
then
must have
take
been
me
good.
home. I mean, no, I thought I was.
I mean, I think you're good now. So
yeah.
I could only imagine.
In my head, that made my ego grow.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, these guys really like me, So we did that, and then I joined this other band, the band that I was saying that I always wanted to be in. Did that. We played a bunch of shows, traveled. Thought we were going to get signed. Played out of town shows. Traveled in a smelly van. Did that whole thing, and we all know when there's rock and roll, typically there's girls.
Yeah.
And being in a rock band, girls like someone who's playing lead guitar.
Yeah.
And growing up, I was on the heavier side of things. So I wasn't always felt like I was popular. I did have older brothers, so I got to hang out with older guys. So that did make me feel cool. But, there's, as we all know, when you're on kind of the heavy side of things, you're more self-conscious and, you worry about that stuff. So being in a rock band with a bunch of skinny dudes who are tattooed and cool and have cool hair, and these girls are giving us attention.
By the way, I've seen your hair in those pictures, and your hair is not that cool.
No, it's not. Back then, maybe, MySpace.com days. And it was just one of those things where when you're in that situation, you feel amazing.
Yeah.
And you feel popular and wanted and loved. Well, coming with that, it was always like, I don't want to say they got more girls than me kind of thing. And when I say girls, I don't mean like, sleeping around like crazy. But it was more the attention, me thinking like
finding your value in that.
Exactly. And where my identity was. And it obviously wasn't. So I did that for a while and, thinking whatever girl was giving me attention was going to be my wife and I was going to marry and that I loved her and all this kind of stuff. Well, time went on and, you go through breakups and it's not your true love or whatever. So I did that for a while. And with rock and roll, typically tattoos are included. So I had, through my brother with working at shout out Truth and Triumph Tattoo, which as Paul was saying is where I worked before I work now. There were some guys that went there and who were quote unquote Christians at the time. And a few of them still are, which is amazing. Well, at hanging out, I still wasn't old enough to get tattooed, so I didn't have any tattoos.
Yeah.
But I was still hanging out with all these older guys. I'm like, this is so cool. I'm so cool. I'm popular kind of thing. So there were a couple dudes that worked there, and they went to the church that actually Paul was just talking about, Apex Community Church in Kettering, and they were the guys that sat in the very, very back row and slid in and slid out, and they, on occasion would ask me if I wanted to go. And I always said no. I was like, no, I'm not. I don't go to church. That's not cool,
Yeah.
And at the time I was dating a girl who just so happened to be a Christian. And she would ask me the same questions like, let's go to Apex. Let's go to Apex. And finally I said, okay, let's go to Apex, just because all these people are asking me, we'll see what it's about. I never understood why you had to go to this building to worship this God that you're all talking about. Why is that a thing?
Yeah.
What's the big deal? So I went to Apex and walked in the front door, and some people greet you, and Apex is pretty large. So there's a lot of people that go there. It's kind of overwhelming at first.
Yeah,
if you don't know anybody, a couple of my dudes were in the back, which luckily I saw. Well, as we were walking in, there's music playing, and it's what I thought was a Coldplay song, was jamming, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is really cool. Like, what is this?
Yeah.
So I go over to my guys and like, dude, they're playing Coldplay. They weren't playing Coldplay. They were just playing a worship song that had
It was probably a song.
Yeah, a delay guitar and, whatever. Phil Wing is leading worship probably. Yeah. And I was like, okay, there's electric guitar at church.
Yeah.
At the church I went to with my friends a long, long time ago, there was no electric guitar. It was just singing.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well maybe church isn't, just that. So we went in and I did that for, it was months and months and months. So we went and, when I say months and months and months, off and on, it wasn't every Sunday. I promise you that.
Were you still playing in the band at this time, or had that dissolved?
I was still playing music. At that time, it was a different band, more than likely. I kind of went through that whole phase for maybe 10 years, trying to be in a band, become a rock star, being a touring musician, making money off of it. One of them still currently writes music. They don't tour a whole lot, but they still do their thing. In my eyes, it's not being a rock star kind of thing.
Gotcha.
And growing up, I had friends that were in bands that did get big and still tour to this day and make money on it, and that's amazing. So I was still playing music at the time, but it wasn't like every weekend traveling kind of thing. So we were going to Apex off and on. So one Sunday, we went without the guys from the tattoo shop. I was like, let's just go. I was in the routine of going, and I was like, oh, this is all right. I'm starting to feel a little something. So we're in the routine of going. And one Sunday we didn't sit in the very back row. We sat way closer, which I was stoked about because, I could hear the guitar better. It's loud, literally feels like a rock concert. I was like, this is great. Until then I wasn't really paying attention to, what Pastor Rob was teaching, whatever sermon was going on. It was kind of just like, get in, listen to the music, get out kind of thing. It was watching the clock every sermon. So one Sunday, worship music was playing and, everyone's worshiping I'm sure you're all familiar with people throwing their hands in the air and that kind of thing. And there was a song called From the Inside Out, I believe.
Yeah.
I think it's a Hillsong song, right?
It may be.
Maybe.
Yeah.
They were playing it, and I had heard it many times before.
Yeah.
I mean, it was in the rotation. Well, that song was going on, and it was different. All of a sudden, I threw my hands in the air, and I felt, I would say, the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And I felt different. I was like, okay, there's something more here.
Yeah.
This is different. And I began worshiping like I never had before. I was singing. It was incredible. And from that Sunday on, I wanted to dig deeper.
Yeah.
It wasn't like
you weren't punching a clock on a Sunday.
Exactly.
You felt it and knew there was something else there.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. I wasn't just going to feel better about myself.
Yeah. I think that for my life, I mean, so much of what I was doing, I was punching a clock,
Exactly.
By service. I was like, well, I'm checking that box off. I should be good. Right.
Right. You feel better about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, oh, I go to church, I'm a good person. I don't cuss all the time. I should be all right. I'm going to go to heaven, like that's great. I didn't know what being saved was. I didn't know really what Jesus was. I didn't know about the gospel.
Yeah.
And that was my fault. I mean, Apex is amazing for house churches. I never joined a house church. I was too nervous kind of thing.
But you moved from Apex to a different church, didn't you?
I did. So after that, Garrison Green, who is pastor's son here at FCF, I grew up playing music, and he was in another band, a hardcore band in the scene called Never Again. Completely different person back then.
Yeah.
He was in a band, and a few other guys, Talbot, they were on metal bands, and we played at a place called Gathering Grounds here local. Just growing up, Tyler Quinn, everybody, we all hung out, Justin, everyone. It was a thing. It was like community as I look at it, but we weren't serving Jesus. It was a Christian venue. So I knew Garrison from back then, and he, I think I'd reached out and knew that they had went to FCF, and I was like, oh, he's, he plays on the worship team at FCF. There's probably 15 dudes that I knew from playing music, and these dudes were bad dudes, and not like bad, like awesome, like bad, like terrible, terrible
good reputation.
Yes. Terrible human beings. And that's a whole nother story that we can talk about later. But if I knew that Jesus could save them, could save Garrison, then there was hope.
Yeah.
So I had reached out and I began hanging out. They'd invite me over to Talbot's house, and we would hang and they'd, give me a little bit more. I remember, the few weeks before I had talked to Garrett, and I had started going to FCF, talking with Garrison, I would say we met up a few times.
Yeah.
So we met at a coffee shop, and he actually gave me his very first Bible. This little thing had writing all over it. It was crazy. So he gave me that, and I read it, and I decided I wanted to give my life to Jesus. And like you were saying, I was still felt like, oh, I'm serving. So I wasn't perfect back then. I promise. I had girlfriends off and on, one girl to the next that I thought I was in love with. I thought I was going to marry.
Yeah.
And that was all abusive kind of thing.
Yeah, even when you have that moment of enlightenment and change that God brings to your life, it's still, hard not to carry
for sure
some of your baggage and your story with you. So, I get that.
Yeah.
I get that.
And so we met up and finally we decided, and I'm not 100% sure why we didn't do it at the church on a Sunday, but we were like, really wanted to get baptized and just give my life to Jesus. So I had a friend who had a swimming pool by our house, and I texted, like probably 15 of my closest friends.
Yeah.
My brother was there, the girl I was dating at the time was there. So Garrison came over and he baptized me in the swimming pool.
That's awesome.
And from then on, my life was definitely different.
Yeah.
And it really hit me on, what it means to be baptized. My sins were, washed by the blood of Jesus kind of thing. So from then on, I started living differently. I understood when I sinned, I responded differently.
Yeah.
I felt different.
Mm-hmm.
The repercussions afterwards, it hit me harder. Before it was, I didn't look at it like that.
Right.
I was just doing stuff and it wasn't bad. It was probably morally wrong, but
I think it's called conviction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's definitely conviction now, even till this day, it hits you differently and you respond differently.
Yeah.
That was me. That was my foot.
I was like, so I sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's okay.
I mean, we both have stories of redemption,
Right.
and I think some may hear our stories and think, I've been redeemed out of greater. I would counter that with, we all fall short of the glory of God,
Amen.
and that we're all, because of, original sin, are, in the same boat to begin with.
Sure.
I just chose a different road to hoe, so to speak. And that's Southern for, a different sin. But I think, getting to know you and getting to know the people in our community by their lives is just, it makes my community, it makes my experience and how I can love on them and serve them and how they can do the same so much better. If we don't tell our stories, if we don't let each other know, where God has brought us from, and what's God is writing now, I think we're missing a little bit of that. And so just wrapping up, our first episode here, I just want to thank you guys for listening. I want to thank you and just ask this, and if we're still figuring this out a little bit. So if it doesn't seem as polished as maybe some things you're listening to, we're sorry for that. But we hope the fact that, the stories that you're going to hear in this season 1, and there's all kinds of stories, and we hope that you can hear that and that God would do something in that for you. And we hope also that spurs you on to tell your story, because, man, I see random people all the time, and I think to myself, I want to know their story. I want to know why they're at the place they are right now. Anything you want to say, Jake, as we close here?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to kind of wrap up my quote unquote testimony. And after giving my life to Jesus, to speed it up a little bit, there was hope for me. There was a drastic change. And what he's saying there is, just because your testimony or your story wasn't crazy, where you're doing drugs or stealing stuff and that kind of thing, it doesn't mean that it's not legit. It's not, it doesn't matter, it totally matters. And for me, after that, the things all fell into place. I met my wife now, Jessie, at FCF. I was hoping for, that kind of love and finding a woman. And once I gave my life to Jesus, a few years later, it happened.
Yeah.
And we can go into detail later, but, I just want to let you guys know that we want to hear your stories, and if you're interested in being a part of the Iron Anchor podcast, feel free to email us at, ironanchorpodcast@gmail.com. And, we're really excited to continue this journey. It's new to us, so some things are still getting ironed out. We're still working on making these videos for you guys, and we hope that you stick around and you'll learn about, some of the men and eventually women here in Dayton. And, we're super stoked.
If our podcast just at least allows you a moment to think about your own story,
right,
and what's gone on in your life, I think, reflection is a good thing. And I think that'll bring a lot to you. So again, we just want to thank you for listening today. Check us out on ironandanchor.com. We're on Instagram at Iron and Anchor Co. He said the Gmail.
Yeah, check it out.
You can find most everything on ironandanchor.com. So thanks for listening to episode 1. We appreciate it.